Hi everyone, good evening and welcome to City Century's RCC webinar series. I'm your co-host for this series, Paul Leamy. I've been working in city law for around 25 years, the last 10 as a city firm partner specialising in real estate work. And I've recently taken on a role with City Century as part of the project team as their principal advisor and ambassador.
Hi everyone, I'm your other co-host, Finnley Sprakes, and I'm working as City Century's Engagement and Research Associate this year during my gap year. And like many of you joining the call tonight, I'm also an aspiring solicitor apprentice.
Thanks, Finn. And RCC is very much your show. It's designed to answer the questions that you may not have had the opportunity to ask at the CC live events. We'll endeavour to cover all of the questions that you've already asked in the sign-up forms, but please do pop any additional questions you may have along the way in the Q&A function. Over the course of the series, we'll be covering all stages of the application process, from researching and shortlisting firms to making applications and completing online tests, right through to preparing for final in-person assessment centres. And we'll even have a bonus episode on the logistics of relocation to the city.
So our first session tonight is going to be focused on how to choose which firms are right for you. So we're looking at shortlisting and researching firms and maximising the value of that research and how you can then use that in your applications going forward. And we've got a brilliant panel for our first episode tonight. So we've got Nawal, who is a fourth-year solicitor apprentice from Simmons & Simmons. We've got George Hanna as well, a solicitor apprentice in his second year at Lewis Silkin, and he's also the founder of the Best Practice newsletter and has recently launched, as me and Paul were discussing earlier, a brilliant podcast breaking through the noise on legal tech and how to use AI effectively. We've got Kutha Hussain, who's from the early careers team at White & Case, and we've also got Catherine Wild, who is a partner at Farrer & Co. and also runs their knowledge and learning and development at Farrers as well. So each of the panels is going to speak, just as a disclaimer, from their own experience and from the approach and advice that they would offer to you as aspiring solicitor apprentices. If you have specific firms after the research that you hopefully take on board with you today, we would also prompt you to look at the individual firms that you are targeting as well and join their open days and online sessions should they offer them.
Thanks, Finn. And so if I can kick off, please, with a question for the two solicitor apprentices on the panel, Nawal and George. Nawal, if I can start with you, how did you go about, and I appreciate this was some time ago for you now, but how did you go about researching the firms you wanted to apply to, and what were the things that you were looking for?
Yeah, it definitely was quite a while ago, which doesn't actually seem like it. But every year I speak to more and more students, and they seem to get younger and younger. But no, definitely. I think when researching firms, I think what people forget is you shouldn't just apply to every single firm that you know offers a solicitor apprenticeship. It is probably the best way to get yourself rejected from a lot of firms because what happens is you end up using a very generic answer. I think the first thing you need to do is take a look at different firm websites. The firm website is always the best place to start. Has a lot of information about the firm and it's also client facing. So it has on the firm's website what the firm wants clients to understand about them and what they specialize in. So I think you need to really take it back to the basics and think, okay, what does this firm offer in terms of the type of law and what types of law am I interested in? So, for example, there is something called a full service law firm, and there is something else called a specialist law firm. And when I first started applying, I had absolutely no idea what any of this meant, and it was only through the process that I started to understand. So, a full service law firm offers all types of law. So, for example, they'll also have a family law practice, whereas a specialist law firm will only offer certain types of law. So, for example, Simmons and Simmons specializes in certain areas, and therefore those are the different sectors that we work in. And if you're not very interested in those sectors, then Simmons and Simmons is probably not the right firm for you. So that was one of the first things I looked at. Simmons and Simmons has a lot to do with science. Healthcare and life sciences is one of their big sectors, as is NREC. And I studied biology and chemistry at A level, and I knew I wanted to continue science in some capacity, even if it wasn't to the lab. So that was one of the biggest things that appealed to me from Simmons and Simmons. Secondly, I think you need to find what is a USP for each firm. I think a lot of students struggle with understanding what differentiates each firm from another firm. And I think the first thing is, if you can't find out what is unique about that firm probably isn't the right firm for you. Every firm is very different from another firm. Simmons and Simmons is different from other firms who aren't specialized, and is also different from other firms which are. Our areas of specialty are different to Bristol's, for example, who specializes in IP and things like that. So, as well as that, you need to look at, what other things they do in terms of the environment, sustainability, what is their culture like. And to find out about their culture and sustainability and things like that, we need to talk to the people. And I think from talking to the people that work at the different firms is how you actually learn the most. There's only so much that you can learn from a website and the resources that the firm offers you. And then I think the next thing is to also think big. You don't actually have to think, in a very limited capacity. It's not just about the different types of seats that you can be offered at the firm. It can also be things like, where do you want to see yourself in the future? So one thing that I've always known is that in the future I want to work in the Middle East at some point, whether that's in 5 years or 10 years is to be determined. So I only applied to firms which had a presence in the Middle East, because that is one of the things that I know is the goal that I'm working towards long term. So for you, it might be something different. You might have always wanted to work in Tokyo, or might have some family in Asia and things like that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be limited to the types of law that the firm practice, but find whatever is unique about the firm and appeals to you, and grab onto that, and then have that explain your enthusiasm for the firm and why you actually want to work there, because that is what will make you stand out when it comes to understanding, your genuine enthusiasm as to why that firm, but also why you really want to work there.
Thanks, Nawal. That's great. And George, coming to you. So, how did you go about it? It's obviously much more recent for you, and maybe you can touch on some of the resources that you used in order to research firms and come up with your shortlist.
Yeah, definitely. And Noel, what excellent answer. I don't think I'll be able to match that. That was so good. Especially, I definitely echo the USP point. You'll definitely learn that when you come to apply to firms, every different firm has something uniquely different to them that they can offer, and it's really important that you distinguish what that is. When I was applying, you really need to make sure that you're not just looking at the website and thinking, okay, wow, Lewis Silkin have won Law Firm of the Year. Wow, you write that down as a statement. But you really need to be thinking, what does that mean to you? And what is that going to mean for your apprenticeship? And at the start, I was applying, I think my first ever firm that I applied to was like Mishcon de Reya, and I was like writing like 10 different things of why I like the firm, and like writing not very much, but like a lot about them. But actually, what I found really worked for me was actually just writing three, maximum four different things of why I like the firm, and then really going in depth. And so maybe for you guys applying for this year, it could be, okay, why Lewis Silkin? Oh, we've won Law Firm of the Year. Okay, amazing. What does that mean for you as an apprentice? And then using the chains of reasoning. So, oh, maybe more clients want to work with us because we're seen as Law Firm of the Year. That might mean that as an apprentice, you're going to be working on better projects because we're gonna have more interesting clients. And that is, yeah, just that like chain of reasoning that if you do like geography or history A level or even GCSE, they really hammer that into you, thinking, so what, so what, so what? Okay, the firm's revenue has gone up. So what, more profit, so what, they can invest in more sectors and expand into new offices. Oh, they've opened a new office in Spain. So what? They've got clients over there, so they're going to make more, I don't know, business or something. So it's just really having that chain of reasoning. Um, in terms of applying, I also think commercial awareness is really important. So IDIN has an amazing newsletter called Little Law. I was a big reader of that. It's all free and he really distills what's going on in the um, day-to-day news and what it means for law firms or what it means for you as a student applying. There's also another one called Zip Law, which is a newsletter, but it is a paid resource. I think there is a slightly like free version, but to get the most out of it, you do have to pay. I found that was a good resource as well. Basically does the same as what IDINS does, but he covers slightly more stories. Um, in terms of other research, I was really like, going onto the firm's LinkedIn pages. That's the first place they announce that if they've like worked on a new deal or something. I was also looking at like a lot of the people's that work there, like LinkedIn's, because that's quite an accurate representation of what perhaps I could be doing. Especially like some of our trainees, they've been on secondment to like Peloton bikes and like other really cool brands like L'Oreal and stuff. And so thinking about, okay, if they're getting the opportunity to go there, then maybe I will as well. What else did I talk about? Oh yeah, also looking on things like Legal Cheek as well. So Legal Cheek go around and like interview all the current apprentices and all the current trainees at each of the firms, and they do like quite an accurate, I think it's pretty accurate from what I've heard from my apprentice friends, like summary and all their different like, and they get ranked across like partner approachability, training, pay, benefits and stuff. So looking at that and thinking if you can imagine yourself there and doing the kind of things that they've spoken about. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. And as my go-to person for all questions related to legal AI, how would you suggest that some of the people listening in today go about using AI to carry out some of that research?
So yeah, AI is really powerful in the way that it can really accelerate the research time from, days or traipsing through the websites to now, like in a few minutes, you can have a report generated for you, which is really cool. Um, Definitely make sure, like, the better the prompt, the better the output. So maybe giving it an example, like, I don't know, I am a student, I'm applying for this firm for this reason, for the apprenticeship. I'm particularly interested in these areas. And I think another thing I found really useful when prompting any AI is giving it the requirement to ask me more questions before it like generates a report or generates an output. So be like, oh, if you're not sure on XYZ, then make sure you clarify me before you proceed and spit out a massive output. So I recommend you do that. Also using things like ChatGPT and Gemini for interview prep. You can like feed it your CV, you can feed it your experiences and get it to generate some questions that are based upon your experiences. I think, it makes it quite realistic to what people do in the real interview. They have a lot of the time your application printed off in front of them and they'll be picking out certain bits. Oh, you mentioned this, tell me more. Well, get the AI to generate some questions in a similar style. And you can always dictate back into ChatGPT using like the voice to text feature, and then get it to like judge your response and tell it that you're looking for a really good star response. So then it'll come back to you and be like, oh, actually, it was good, but you didn't really talk about the results as much as you could have. What about you think about this next time, kind of things, which is pretty powerful. But also really making sure that you're validating the output as well. Like I was speaking to the early careers people at Lewis Silkin, and one of the trainees in the previous cycle had mentioned that we'd worked with a particular client, but actually when she went to go and check with like the matter handler who was in charge of that team, they found that they actually hadn't worked with that client, and actually we were just commenting on our website on a piece of news. On something else or something. So, for example, I don't know, it might have been like Sky, and we're not, Sky aren't a client, but Sky have had this massive legal case and we're commenting on it, and they thought that we'd worked with them. So, just really making sure you're double checking those outputs because they're not always correct.
Okay, that's brilliant. And it seems like there's a whole world of information out there at your fingertips now. Whereas, if I look back to 25, 30 years ago when I was applying for training contracts, it was all paper driven. You had to ring up a firm, get them to send you their glossy brochure that arrived 2 weeks later in the post. And it was all sort of postal driven. So, using all of the tech that's available, I think is what I'm hearing there.
Definitely.
That's excellent. Thank you for such brilliant answers from our apprentices. If I could go to Kutha and Catherine and ask, what tips do you have for aspiring solicitor apprentices for identifying what firm is a good fit for them? Should we start with Kutha?
Sure. Thank you, Finn and Noel and George. Some fantastic answers and content there. I can see why you're apprentices already. And I do agree with a lot of sort of the things that you've touched on in terms of sort of finding the right firm for you, or to pick on sort of Finn's question. I mean, there is a wealth of information and resources out there, and it probably does feel a little bit overwhelming at first. But the first thing I always tell people, it is not a massive spot the difference exercise. So yes, to Nawal and George's point, you should be understanding sort of what is the USP, the type of work, the types of clients that that firm is working on, the jurisdictions, or sort of, for example, or the geographies that they're sort of present in. But my sort of big tip is sort of do a bit of a deep dive in terms of the areas that you come across, whether it's on their sort of general sort of careers website or firm website, or some of the resources that the panel's already sort of suggested, things like Legal Cheek, all About Law, whatever it might be. Iden's newsletter, I also read, George, every week. I've subscribed to that, and it comes to my work email, and I read it every Wednesday morning. It's a really good resource in terms of finding out sort of the types of deals that these firms are working on, and then doing a bit of a deep dive in the areas that sort of personally interest you. So if, for example, M&A, so mergers and acquisitions, is an area of law that, you typically find, you've noticed that I'm generally really interested in this, that's what I would focus your research on, because we're not expecting you to be subject matter experts. In fact, you're probably going to get some of the technical aspects a little bit wrong. That's okay. All we're really doing in the early career space is really assessing, how do you process this information? What is interesting you right now? And do you understand sort of how we're positioning ourselves as a firm? And I just want to hear your ideas. So, I mean, I remember I did math as one of my A levels, and I always use this as an example. So if anyone is doing math out there, hello and respect. But I remember in my A levels, sometimes you could solve for X incorrectly, but pick up method marks along the way. And that's really just what I want to see, whether it's in the application form or in the interviews itself. Tell me about your understanding about, if it is M&A that's interesting you. What do you understand about that practice? And now to try and have an attempt to talk about the type of work that our law firm is engaging in that space. Maybe the types of clients we're working with, or a recent deal. Why did that particular company want to buy this other company? Typically in these deals, no one is buying a company because they think they're about to lose loads of money. There was an opportunity they saw there. Have a go at thinking about, what opportunities do you think that the client was seeking? And like I said, not expecting you to be a subject matter expert. You can get it a little bit wrong. Just, it's that thought process, but using our firm website as a guide, as a resource, maybe some other publications, deals are typically referenced in newspapers or podcasts. People are talking about them. See what you understand, and using all of these tools and resources as your guide, and then start talking about it. But because it's relating to our work naturally, because you picked up on a practice area or the types of clients that we're working in, you're already ticking the boxes for motivation, commercial awareness, and understanding for their career, because you've just decided to tell me why you're so passionate about this area. And that's what we really like to hear from our candidates. So that's sort of how I would approach it. And like I said, it's okay if you get a little bit wrong. Another tip I always tend to give people is, whilst you're reading all of these resources, whether it's sort of a news clip that we've sort of added to our own website or a podcast, whatever it might be, have a go at talking about it with your friends and family. Don't leave it to the online resources and just absorbing information. I know I'm guilty of this myself. Sometimes I'm reading things, I'm listening to podcasts, and it's really easy to think that we've understood it because we're absorbing it. But actually, have a go, say to a friend or a family member, hey, friend, I've just read an article about White and Case's deal about XYZ. If they didn't understand what you were talking about, neither did you. It is a skill in life to be able to explain something in the most simplest way that everyone in the room can understand. And that's something I really sort of enjoy about working with the lawyers that I get to in my career, is they have a really good way of sort of distilling information depending on who's in the room. And that's really part of the assessment process as well. So when you're trying to sort of get across your understanding of, this is the firm I've chosen because, explain it to me in a way that anyone can understand. So have a go with friends and family. It doesn't need to be every single conversation. That will get boring very quickly. But when you can, slip it in the chat, in the radar, and then you're really testing yourself in terms of the websites that you're reading, the news articles, the podcasts, Iden's newsletter as well, whatever it might be that you're using to bolster your knowledge about the firm. And then equally, you'll find, oh, actually, I'm really enjoying this conversation about M&A. Oh, that means you actually like it. But if actually you're reading a couple of articles and you're like, this is actually a really slow hug, I'm like, maybe this isn't the type of law for me because I'm not really enjoying it in my personal life, this random chat that I'm having. So then you can shift to a different area of law. And you'll just notice, and I'm sure we're, the generation I'm talking to, you're all sort of online, you're probably doing on a bit of a YouTube deep dive, link after link on websites. If you're naturally building on your interest for private equity, debt finance, whatever it might be, okay, that is a good indicator that you're interested in this type of work. Now look at the law firms that work in this space, in those jurisdictions, and follow the rabbit hole there. But if you're like, oh, actually, this is very boring and I'm not really interested, this isn't the type of law for you. And there's a whole array of law out there for you to pick from. And I think, working with City Centre is so great because you've got access to seeing what different types of law firms can do. So that's the type of thinking I would apply when you're when you're trying to pick the law firm for you. It will take time, I know, and it's a bit overwhelming, but I know it's easier said than done, but have some fun with it. You should enjoy the research and be excited about the career. And that's something I love about working in early careers recruitment, because I get to meet so many excited people, but they've done all that research. I mean, hopefully we get to help them along the way on insight days and open days, but it should, hopefully you'll find sort of your home, because as I'm sure many lawyers will tell you, and I've heard this phrase a lot, so sorry if you've heard it already as well, this career is a marathon, not a sprint. It takes time. So putting in that effort up front is definitely worth it. I don't know if I've answered your question, Finn, but that was sort of a bit of a deep dive in terms of how my brain works, but happy to answer any follow-up questions. Catherine, I don't know what your 2 cents is as well.
That was an excellent answer. Thank you, Kutha. I think there's a real ethos there. As an aspiring apprentice, I know that you get this sort of breadth of information, and it does feel quite a burden, and you don't know all the technicalities. And it sounds like there's a real ethos there of pushing your comfort zones and trying to understand it, because it's not about the result, it's about the journey. So that's great. If I could pass that question on to Catherine, what tips would you have?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they've all answered so beautifully already. So I'm going to bring it right back to basics and just talk about why I think it is important that you look at it, because a lot of your friends might not be considering apprenticeships, they'll be looking at going to uni. And I think actually, if you use a similar approach to how you're looking at your law firm, I think that's going to help you, because you are going to be in these firms for at the very least 6 years. Or like me, I joined my firm 25 years ago. So, choose well. But then look at, going back to basics, look at things like geography. So, do you want to be in London, or do you want to be in the regions, or in, another city? You might even go a bit deeper than that. I mean, the firm that I work at, we work in a 300-year-old building in the West End, overlooking lots of green space. That might be what you like. Or you might have in your head this idea or a dream of working in a big glossy skyscraper further over in the city. So kind of have a sense of that, and look about where these firms are. Think about the size of the firm. So the Farrers we've got around 600 people. The other firms that we've got on have got a range of people up to probably thousands, which means that that gives a different type of culture and the way that you will be represented there at the firm. So have a think through that as well. I'd also think about the structure of the apprenticeship. So like all your friends looking at the course that they're going to be doing at uni, have a look at what the structure is over your 6 years. So at Farrers, the way that we structure it is that the first 2 years, our apprentices are in our business services team. So they get used to being in an office, they rotate around those teams, they get a sense of a law firm as a business before we let them loose on the legal teams in year 3. And then they do 2 years there working as a paralegal, and then in the final 2 years they're treated like a trainee solicitor and do a rotation around the firm in that way. So have a look again at what the other firms out there offer to see if the structure of the apprenticeship is going to work for you. And then I suppose the final tip I had is that a little bit like going around a university open day, that's when you're looking at the website and other things that the firms put out, that's the very best, the really glossy image of these firms. And I'd really encourage you to get under the skin as best you can, to get as close to the people that work there. So the stuff that George was mentioning earlier, where there's been interviews with apprentices, or whether they're on a panel or whatever else, where you've actually got the voice of people that are working at the firms, that's what you should really tune into and listen, get the true picture of what it's like there. So the glossy stuff is important, absolutely. As Noel said, you start with the websites, and that's where you're going to get the best overview of the firm, but dig as deep as you can and see what you can find. So yeah, LinkedIn profiles and stuff like that would be where I would start.
That's excellent. Thanks, Catherine. If I pass back to you, Paul.
Yeah, sure. And so, the next question we've got for the apprentices is around numbers. So, we all know that it's a highly competitive environment out there, and the temptation would be to apply to as many firms as possible because you're increasing your chances. But listening to what you're all saying about the research and level of research that you need to do on those firms in order to be successful, clearly that's not the best kind of way forward. So can you tell us a bit about how many firms you chose to shortlist? And did you think that that was manageable when you was applying? George, can I come to you first on that one?
Yeah, sure. I was a pretty bad student. I applied to as many as I could. I don't want to leave any opportunity unturned. Oh, Osborne Clark have opened. Oh, quick, let's apply. Oh, Farrett and Co have opened. Oh, quick, let's apply. Literally, I was applying to everywhere, and I regretted it. Well, I didn't regret it because I got an apprenticeship in the end, fortunately. But I applied to like 29, I think it was in the end. Now, on top of that, you want to be going to the gym, you need to be revising for your A levels, you want to be going to your friends' 18th birthday parties, because that's when you all turn 18 in year 13. And there was a lot to handle. But I think what definitely helped me was organization. So having what was to start with a very messy spreadsheet and then tracking every single stage. And so, okay, written application, tick, the psychometric test, the video interview, then the assessment center, and not losing track of where you've gotten up to. Especially a lot of firms still do video interviews. I remember like I very nearly missed for a while the video interview deadline. It literally only give you like 3-4 days, and you've put that much effort in already with the written application. You don't want to be throwing a opportunity down the drain just because you can't keep track of when the video interview closes, because these firms do not take any excuse for a late application. Once it's closed, it's closed, which is fair enough. So on hindsight, I think looking back, I personally recommend around 15 applications, probably around half of what I've done. I think anything over 15 or even 12, I think you start to lose the quality of application, especially with written um, being the hardest and taking the most time. Um, so yeah, that was my experience.
Brilliant. Noel, is that sort of similar to you, or sorry, you're on mute.
I will mute. I knew it'd happen at some point. Just quickly to follow on from Catherine's point that she made earlier before it leaves my head, I think another thing that students should look for is the cohort size of apprentices as well as the apprenticeship structure. Because I think if there's only 2 apprentices, so you're only going to have 1 pair, as opposed to if you're going to have 5 pairs, it's a very different experience. So I think that's also something you should consider. But to answer your question, Paul, I think for me it was a different experience. I started my application process very late in the application cycle. I started in February, and so very many firms had already closed. So I tried to look at what firms were open and to see which ones I was interested in. In the end, I applied to about 7 firms, which was definitely very manageable. But I think the advice that I would give is a little bit different. I think rather than having a set number, is that you shouldn't do it as a set number because there's no magic number. I know one person who only applied to 1 firm and by some sort of sheer luck managed to get that single firm. And I know other people who've applied for 30 firms and they've only got that 1 offer out of it. So it's kind of very all or nothing in terms of how many firms. I think rather than having a set number, you should do it on a rolling basis. So you should definitely not start with anything more than 10 firms, and even then you should not do all of those in one day because the quality is not going to be there. I did it almost an application a week, and that gave me enough time to kind of get into the firm, understand what it is, and also decide if I was still interested in the firm by the end of it, because you're not going to know if you're interested in the firm just through one website or one LinkedIn post. You're going to have to do a bit of a deep dive before you actually decide, this is a firm that I am actually interested in. So what I would do is I would start with the first couple of firms, and then if I get rejected, I would add another firm. onto that list, and then I would go through that way. So that way, if you do it on a rolling basis, it's much more manageable, and you still kind of only end up with about 10 firms that you're looking at any point in time. Rejections are a part of the process, and I know it's a hard pill to swallow. I definitely really struggled with it, but the saying goes, for every one yes, you get 10 no's, and it got to the point for me that I was counting the no's until I actually got to the yes. And so you just have to accept it. And I think the rolling basis makes it more manageable, because you have to remember, at the end of the day, your offer for a solicitor apprenticeship is conditional on your grades. So you have to maintain your grades, and you also just need to maintain a social life. So if you're struggling in the application process, in terms of making sure that you're enjoying the fun part, because you're never going to be that young and have those opportunities to be with your school friends again, you are going to struggle in the apprenticeship. So it is also a good point for you to reflect and see how you're doing in that application process, and think, how will I, how will I be as an apprentice? Because as an apprentice, that is what you'll be doing. You will be studying part time and working full time, and you have to balance that social aspect alongside it. So it is almost a little bit of an insight as to what your life would be as an apprentice.
That's brilliant, and that kind of leads quite neatly into my next question, because you mentioned achieving the grades that you need in order to be successful in taking up the apprenticeship once you've received the offer. But can you tell us a bit about how you went about balancing making all of the applications and doing all of the deep dive research that goes with it, alongside studying?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think it's all about setting time and project slash time management. And it's about kind of blocking out, certain hours for certain things, and doing it. I mean, the best way I found was to kind of reflect my academic timetable. My academic timetable had certain amount of hours for each subject. So I would break up my weekend like that, including having dedicated rest. I mean, I think it got to one point in year 12 where I was just so anxious about A levels that all I could think about was the exams, that I couldn't actually function. I couldn't study because I was too worried about the possibility of doing the exams and them not going well, that I was too anxious to study. And so by not studying, it was affecting my grades. And then everything was kind of a mess. And I remember sitting down with my teacher, and she said, "You're not going to be able to study well if you've not kind of balanced, that time, and you've accounted for when you're going to have that break and spend time with your friends and family." So I think what you should do is to pick 2 evenings that you will keep free for yourself. That is your time for you to do whatever you like, and then have a structure throughout the week. It's definitely not a cramming. A levels are a marathon, they're not a sprint. You'll not be able to learn all of the content for 2 years in the last month. I am one of those people who definitely tried to do that, even in the lead up, and it does not work out in your favor most of the time. So, what you need to do is do it slowly but consistently. So, set aside a couple of hours, build on it from year 12. I think it's like you should be doing about 20 hours of studying a week in year 12, which increases to about 30 to 40 hours, which sounds quite scary. It does include your study time. Speak to your teachers. What do they recommend? Spend time with your teachers for them to point out your weaknesses, because they know your work better than you do. And I think when it comes time to the social aspect, you need to make sure that you ring fence time for you to enjoy and be yourself and enjoy that part of life, quite literally, because if you do not balance it, you will burn out. And if you burn out, then you'll be in that position which you really don't want to be in.
Okay, and thanks for that, Noel. Yeah, it's important that everyone looks after themselves. But George, how about you? How did you sort of balance making applications and study? I'm assuming you had some whizzy AI product that set out your schedule for you.
Oh, I wish, Paul. I wasn't as savvy back then. No, I definitely echo Noel's points with really reserving an evening, being like, right, tonight I'm gonna revise these topics. Tomorrow I'm gonna do some of my apprenticeship applications. And I also really think, because when looking back, I very much was like, all the deadlines tonight, let's cram in another application and then do it all at once. But if you can, really plan out all the deadlines, because I think the written application is definitely the heaviest part of the process. And it gets easier as you go along, because you can use your answers for your written application to help prepare for the interview and etc. But really making sure you're doing it little and often. I think if you come back to it like a week later application, you'll probably notice loads of mistakes and loads of things that you want to change. And even just getting your parents or a teacher or anyone, literally anyone, to look over it and be like, wait, what? That does not make sense. I'd change that. And even if they have no idea about law firms, just like the readability and the flow of the application, because if you keep coming back to it with tired eyes, you like almost ignore the mistakes, but the recruitment people are very much looking at it with fresh eyes, and they're just going to spot the mistakes like straight away. So yeah, I'd recommend that, and then also just being really diligent. I felt like I had to always be productive in year 13, and that I can't have a night off, well, because a night off could be another apprenticeship application. I was such like a nerd about it, but you do definitely need to have some time off. And even just like when you have a time off, maybe don't watch TV, don't watch a podcast or anything, don't do anything. Literally just like go for a walk, because that's going for a walk with no music, no podcast is when I find I can have the best thoughts and the best creative moments. If I'm struggling for LinkedIn post ideas, I'll go for a walk and do that, and then suddenly loads will come rushing in. So you've got to almost like force that upon yourself, and yeah, make yourself bored intentionally to then get good ideas for like your apprenticeship applications. Bit of random advice.
Brilliant. Thanks both.
That's great. Yeah, thank you both. Some great insight there. So if I go back to Catherine and Kuta, we'll start with you, Catherine. Could I ask, how would you advise aspiring solicitor apprentices to identify the USPs within a firm? I think when you do this research, as Noel sort of touched on, you go on the website and you've got that upfront client-facing approach of knowledge, but how would you go deeper to find the USPs specifically about the firms? If we start with you, Catherine.
Yeah, thanks, Finn. Well, first off, I think to say that it's quite hard to do that because every firm is thinking that it's unique and has something, but it's quite hard amongst all that gloss to really find it. I think it might actually be easier if you start grouping firms together, whether it's by the size of the firm or the type of law that they do, to start then, once you've got that grouping, then you can start to dig a bit deeper and see the difference between them. But I think it was Keith earlier that said it's not, it's hard to spot the difference. So don't worry too much about that. Just see what you can find out. And then, like we said before, just dig as deep as you can, with the very best thing being the voice of the people that work there, which I know I've said before, but I absolutely stand by that, whether it's at the City Century live events, whether it's the individual events that the firms are running themselves, following these apprentices on LinkedIn just to hear their voices. And then the only other thing that I say very much with a personal thing from my point of view is don't always judge a book by the cover when somebody else has written about the firm, because quite often there are legal journalists out there, particularly about my firm, who will say it's really old fashioned and it's 300 years old and it's very stuffy or whatever it might be, and it's just absolutely not the case when you get to speak to the people that work here. So don't always judge a book by its cover either. So kind of tie that in with going as deep as you can and just try and get the real picture.
That's great. Thank you, Catherine. If I come to you with the same question, Kuta.
Sure. So I mean, I agree with everything that Catherine sort of just said. I sometimes find it almost easier from a candidate perspective is to find your hook into one of those USPs, or the USP that the firm sort of holds them out to be, and tell us or explain to us, hey, what does that mean? And relate it to a piece of work that they may have done. So almost, I think George mentioned it before in terms of some of the A-level subjects. It's so what, so what, so what. So try that approach with, so for example, a lot of sort of our, white in cases competitors, we sort of hold ourselves out to be sort of very international. Okay, but what does that mean for a full service law firm to be that international in terms of the geographies that we work with? Maybe a deal that was so cross border, the different for offices that were involved, why were they involved? And then you're kind of sort of hooking onto one of those USPs, say the international aspect of it, but you've now related it to something that the firm has actually done, something a bit tangible, but now you've explained your thought process and telling us how you've learned or how you've analyzed that bit of information, and you've sort of provided something with a bit more sort of depth or context, if you like. And as I mentioned before, it doesn't, if you have thinking out loud, perhaps something you're saying slightly inaccurate or you misinterpreted a piece of information, don't worry about that bit. We just want to know, how did you get from A to B? And full service law firm to be that international in terms of the geography geographies that we work with, maybe a deal that was so cross-border, the different for offices that were involved, why were they involved, and then you're kind of sort of hooking onto one of those USPs, say the international aspect of it, but you've now related it to something that the firm has actually done, something a bit tangible, but now you've explained your thought process and telling us how you've learned or how you've analyzed that bit of information, and you've sort of provided something with a bit more sort of depth or context, if you like. And as I mentioned before, it doesn't, if you have thinking out loud, perhaps something you're saying slightly inaccurate or you misinterpreted a piece of information, don't worry about that bit. We just want to know, how did you get from A to B? And if you happen to get to interview stage, maybe somebody like, oh, that's such an interesting perspective, have you thought about it from this perspective? And then we'll just have a chat about problem solving in the moment. So I wouldn't worry too much in terms, because I think sometimes I meet candidates that they want to say really clever things about our USP, our strategy, the work that we do, and almost in that sense of wanting to show off, they then become super reserved, and they don't tell us that thought process that probably went behind all of that research anyway. So don't be afraid of making some of those mistakes and just talk about it, but find your hook of sort of an aspect of the USP of the firm, that, or so they hold themselves out to be, and what does that mean for that law firm? And if it's sometimes they're like, oh, well, you're band one in XYZ, okay, tell me about that type of work. So if it's energy, and then we sort of do a lot of work in that space, tell me about sort of the types of energy deals that we're a part of, or one of them, and why. Again, it's just kind of finding something and then doing a bit of a deep dive into it, rather than a spot the difference exercise, or you do this and this firm does that. Because at the same time, and I know I probably shouldn't be saying this for having someone who does work at a law firm, but you probably find, as you're doing your research, they probably sound quite similar, and that's probably because they are. I mean, they're competing for the same work, which means that they'll be having the same similar strengths. Sometimes we're on the same deals, but from slightly different aspects of it. So, we all kind of speak the same language, and by we, I mean the lawyers. And so there is a lot of similarity there, and that's fine. So find it's almost when I'm reading applications or I'm interviewing someone, just make me believe in that moment that this is the only law firm you ever want to work at, and just talk about our work. I mean, having, hearing from the panel and having worked in early careers for a number of years, I know that's not true. And I know you're looking at other law firms. That's okay. But in that moment, just talk about everything white in case. Talk about our work, our deal, our jurisdictions, how we hold ourselves out to be, and what does that mean? I think the biggest mistake that people make is they'll say something like international, band one, and then I'll just leave it at that and walk away. And I'm like, okay, I mean, you're right, you're absolutely right. We are, you know, international in that sense, or we're really big on these types of deals. But, delve a bit deeper. You're already now sort of doing a two in one. You've talked about our USPs, our type of work, and you've deep dived, and then I'm thinking, okay, wow, this person is really passionate about our work. Let's move them on to the next stage and see what else that they want to talk about. That's how I would approach it. So just kind of make it everything white in case if you're applying to our firm, and you can apply this advice to any other law firm. But that's how I would approach it, and rather than thinking, oh my God, they're gonna test me on their competitors too, and I need to know all about them. I do suggest and encourage you to read up on our competitors, because all you'll find is that will bolster your knowledge about the type of work and arena that we're in, if that makes sense. It's all good information. But when you're talking to that law firm, just have them believe that's the only place you want to work at, because you're only talking about their work.
That's great. Thank you, Kuthra. If I could just open this up then to all four of our panel members tonight. If an aspiring solicitor apprentice was researching your firm, so Simmons and Simmons, Lewis Silky and White and Case, or Farrer and Co., what one part of your firm do you think stands out as a USP that you think's really unique for a candidate researching your firm? If we start with Noel.
Sure, I think there's different things. I mean, we recently had a new managing partner elected after hustings, and the direction that she's taking the firm in is a little bit different to the direction that the previous managing partner was taking the firm in. So one of the things that we have invested in quite heavily over the last couple of years is AI. We have our own, and I think we are the only firm to have our own legal engineering team. Wavelength is a very big part of the firm. They create lots of tools and make things a lot easier. We have our own in-house legal AI, which is separate from Harvey. It's called Percy. We use Percy for a lot of different things to support us. So I think a lot of students know that AI is a big thing and think that a lot of firms hate AI or that AI has no place in law firms. But I think there's a different mindset depending on what firm you are in. And Simmons is definitely a big fan of AI and implementing AI to make sure that we are using it in the best way possible.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Noel. If we come to George.
Yeah, I'd also say AI as well. How can I not, given I write so much about it? I think an interesting thing is that I haven't seen many other law firms do is we are a employment law specialist firm, so employment law and media. And you'll learn that every different firm has a specialism. Um, and we've launched something called Delphius, which is an employment law like AI agent tool. And so, but not just mentioning that in your applications, but thinking about the economics of that. And so for a long time, law firms went off the billable hour model, but now we've essentially packaged up all of our institutional knowledge, and so all the knowledge within Lewis Silkin as a class leading firm in employment law, and package that into an employment agent, which we are now selling on a subscription basis directly to our clients. And if you look at our Delphius website, you'll see that you ask it a few questions and then it will recommend a lawyer within Lewis Silkin or within the Jus Laboris, which is a global alliance of employment lawyers, of someone to speak to in that jurisdiction about your problem. And to like, so it'll basically give you some guidance on like, oh, here's what I think you should do. If you want us to take action, then speak to one of us. And I think that's a really cool thing to speak about in your applications, and how I reckon more firms are going to be doing that for more practice areas, not just employment, real estate, IP, loads of different things, and having specialist things with the backing of a city name behind it into an AI like model. I think it's going to be really interesting. The other USP for Lewis Silkin, I definitely think, would be our culture. I think a lot of firms say that about themselves. But you can really tell by, well, going to open days, webinars, speaking to people at the firm, and getting a sense for the culture and what they stand for. And yeah, I think the culture here is nothing short but excellent. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you for that, George. If we go to Kutha.
Yes, sure. I think something that I hear a lot of candidates sort of call out as well in their applications or when I'm talking to them is they pick up on the fact that White & Case is so international. That when we talk about it a lot on our website too. And so effectively what that means is that even those in the London office, I don't think typically the work that they do, and if they do, very rarely it will ever be regional. And that's the same for sort of most of our offices around the globe. So that in terms of effectively what international means to us, it means that you are typically working on those deals that very cross-border. You're collaborating with your colleagues all over the world, which means time zones get really fun for everyone. Your clients are all over the place, and that is sort of, a good starting point in terms of thinking about how, the types of the environment that you want to be in, the type of work you want to be working in is, that in of itself is definitely something to consider whilst you're making your applications. And then I would then just, as I've mentioned before, do a bit of a deep dive into some examples, sort of maybe practice areas that you're interested in. What do you think that they do, some example deals that they've worked on and how that sort of aligned to your interest. But it's definitely something that a lot of candidates sort of pick up on when they do their research into White & Case. But again, sort of taking it that one step further, and we have sort of currently a lot of our early careers populations typically do go on secondment, and so that can be part of your sort of research and conversation, whether it's in an interview or in the application process when you're talking about that international element. I would though suggest you sort of also do some research in terms of some of those offices and what they're doing out there, because in an interview you don't want to say, oh, I want to go to Paris because I wanted to have live the Emily in Paris lifestyle for about 6 months and then come back. I mean, absolutely, I would too. But thinking about actually what is the Paris office doing right now, or what type of work that they're generating out there, and why is that interesting to you? Or have a go at talking about the work aspect of it. So I think I do meet a lot of candidates who are so eager to sort of see the world and travel, and that's fantastic. But we want to always relate it back to the work in some way, shape, or form. So finding sort of whatever that USP is to you and relate it relating it back to what does that mean for your career, your day to day, hopefully at some point. How will that sort of shape you as a lawyer, if this is the environment that you're sort of going to be in? So yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Kutha. And then if we lastly goes Catherine.
Thanks, Finn. Lots of things going through my head. The one that sticks out for me is our heritage. So have been around for 325 years next year. We've had some fascinating clients over that time. So Charles Dickens, Scott of the Antarctic, the royal family, and we're really proud of our heritage and the kind of storms that we've ridden out over that long history. And like I said before, that doesn't mean, though, that we're old-fashioned. We're right bang up to date, going to all the stuff that George has been talking about. Innovation and AI is a big deal at the firm. So I think that kind of juxtaposition of history and modern is something that Farrers does really well. And then on an absolute personal note, exactly as George says, culture's everything. And what I always say to the students that I meet is that I would not have stayed at this firm for 25 years were it not for the fact that it's a really lovely place to work. Got lots of friends here. Coming to work is a real joy. And so that's the kind of thing that you want to be hearing from people that are working at these places, that they actually enjoy coming to work day to day. They don't have to stay for 25 years, but if they have, I think that tells you something.
Thank you. That's great. So if I just thank you all for your contributions to the first side of our episode tonight, that brings us to a close for the first section. We're now going to move on to some questions from the audience. So as I crafted the sign up link, you had the opportunity to share with us some questions that you didn't feel, as Paul sort of mentioned at the start, you haven't had answered yet, whether that be at a City Century Live event, whether it be through your own personal research. So myself and Paul have collated those into 2 or 3 reoccurring questions that we saw and some common themes that were emerging through your questions, and we're going to ask those. I'll also just draw your attention now to the Q&A function. As we go through these questions, I'll be monitoring the Q&A. So if you've got any questions for our panel that have come up throughout the call, please feel free to drop those in now, and we'll try and find some time at the end to ask those. So if I just kick off then with our first question from the audience. Our aspiring solicitor apprentices have all of this new research. They've got this plethora of knowledge. How can they embed that and distill the key points from their research into written applications? If we start with Catherine on that one, please.
I think, George, you made a really good point before. I think it was George, tell me if it was, about narrowing it down to kind of 3 points. Sorry if it wasn't you, George, but not to go kind of over the top in it. Just think of, just kind of take what you can, look at the main things. So that, you know, the type of law, the culture, the history, whatever it might be, and then go deep on those, and then replicate that in your application. I think that's probably the way to go.
That's brilliant. Thank you. If I come to Kutha on that.
Yeah, sure. I would say, sort of in the same way that you're doing at school at the moment, is sort of really referring back to it as an exam question. So I remember when I was in school, sometimes, depending not and for my A levels, I did sort of chemistry and biology too. Oh well. But I also did English literature, and I remember sort of depending on which stage I got to in my A level, sometimes those questions can be quite long, and you always have to like break down the question, almost highlight the bits as to what is it actually asking me, and then almost treat it in the same way you would any exam question, because typically the clues are in the question itself. I mean, in early careers as a recruiter, honestly, I want you all to do well. It makes my job so much easier when you're all fantastic. So there are some clues in there, whether it's in the application questions themselves or in an interview a little bit later down the line. Interviews might be a little bit easier because we can ask you follow-up questions, but I would treat it like you would an exam question. If you're not hitting all the bits that you've highlighted when you're sort of reading the question, you probably haven't answered the question. And I know sometimes when you're writing your answers, you might want to sort of add sort of really, really nice, eloquent bits because they sound really, really nice. And then when you're rereading it, if it's not adding value or it's not answering the question, you can just edit it out. So don't sort of waste your word count just writing things that sound pretty. I know it's really painful. I remember doing that in my English literature exams. They're like, oh, it sounds so good, but I have to, get on with my time. So I would treat it the same. What is the exam question? What is it asking of me? And you'll find pretty much in early careers processes, we're not very subtle about it. We know what we're looking for, and so we're asking it on the face of it. So there is, we're not trying to catch you out. There's no sort of cloaks and daggers. We've asked, the question itself probably will represent the skill or the competency or the motivation question that we're after. So take a second to really think about it. And nail it that way. But I hope that helped.
That's brilliant. Yeah, thank you, Kuthra. If we go to George, how would you go about potentially maybe even down an AI route? How would you go about using that research to then embed it and link it to your applications? Am I right in thinking that you have to be off at 6:30, George?
Yes, that's right, but I've got 2 minutes.
No worries. Perfect.
Maybe I'd start by, I don't know, you could maybe, I haven't done this myself, so you'd have to like trial it yourself, but you could maybe use an AI to give you the top 4 points that maybe you should write about given your experiences. If you give the AI a really good overview of, oh, I've done this for my volunteering, and maybe it links to a part of like, I don't know, ESG of that the firm have done, then you could always write about that. And then, oh, look, the firm have an ESG award for having, I don't know, I read about some firm when I was applying having some like beehive on the roof of their office, and I wrote about that in my applications, and I'd done some like geography trip or something. So it's always linking it back to you and making sure it's linked back to you personally. Um, so yeah, maybe I'll do that on the AI front. But yeah, like Catherine was saying, just making sure that you're really hammering home 3 important points and analyzing the hell out of them. So what, so what, so what? Yeah. Um, And I really like Nawal's point earlier as well about the number of apprentices that the firm takes on. You can definitely like talk about that in the sense of perhaps a larger cohort, you'd prefer to be in a larger cohort. Okay, so what maybe it'll be better like socially, but then if it's a smaller cohort, then maybe you'll get more access to the partners. If you'll like say put all in one team or something, that won't be very good if you're all fighting over work. So you can kind of analyze it like both ways.
That's excellent. I think Paul will join me in thanking you very much for your time this evening, George. Your contributions have been
Yeah.
super useful. Thank you very much.
Thanks all. Bye bye.
Cheers.
No worries. And then if I just take that last question to yourself, Nawal, what would you give as advice for distilling this newfound information into your written applications?
Sorry, could you repeat that again?
So going, sorry, just back to that question, how would you go about using this new research that you've got about your shortlisted firms? How would you go about distilling that into a written application?
I think, when you do your research, you find out a lot of information about that firm, but not all of that information is A, relevant, and two, needed or specific enough for your application. A lot of it will be background information that you need to digest to understand why you appreciate the firm and why that firm is the right for you. So I think based on all of the research that you will have done, it should be at least a page, a summary of what you know and understand from the firm. You need to take from that. What is it, as I think Kufa, you said earlier, that you can place your hook on. You need something that you can talk about. If it's just something that you can say one sentence, it's probably not going to be the piece of research that you need to include because you're not going to be able to expand on it. I've always used the peel method. I know everybody has about it: point, evidence, explain, link. They hammer it into you at school, and then everybody thinks it's the worst thing. But I find is the easiest structure to use in your application because it always takes you back to the question. So when you're thinking about what evidence you're going to use, you need to link it back to the point that you're trying to make. So don't try and, as my history teacher used to say, sledgehammer in things that don't make sense. Everything that you write should be with purpose. You don't need any flowery words. You don't need to kind of think of, what is the best way of saying this in as many words. In fact, how can you say your point in as least many words as possible so you can fully maximize on the limited word count that you have? You should really be using plain English. There's no need to open the thesaurus as I initially thought you did. And just make sure that the research that you are using is strategic in the sense that you are able to expand on it. If you are asked in an interview, you know what it is you're talking about. It's not just something you kind of read in passing and you have no idea, because that's the way that will make you unique, because you understand what you're talking about.
That's great. Thank you, Noel. I think it's really interesting to listen to what you and George have just touched on at the end and sort of linking it back to school, which makes it much more familiar territory. I know when I've been writing my applications this year, you've got quite short word counts and so much that you want to talk about. So having that really concise structure that, we're all, I'm sure, used to from whether it be our GCSEs or our A-level subjects makes it a bit more familiar. So that's really good advice to take forward. Thank you. If I pass it back to you, Paul.
Yeah, sure. That's excellent advice. So the next question really that we've had in is all about values. And so when a candidate goes onto a law firm's website, they reach the landing page. The landing page talks about values. They look at another firm's landing page. It talks about very similar values. And I think what the question is how do aspiring solicitors really get to know what a firm's culture is all about? And how they can judge whether that firm's the right firm for them. Can I go to Catherine first on that one, please?
Yeah, sure. And I absolutely agree with that it's like we said before, it's hard to spot those differences between the firms, and many of them will say that they've got the same values. So I think what you need to do is look at how the firm lives those values. So what initiatives is it out there doing, whether it's on an ED&I footing, on a ESG footing to do with the environment, sustainability, what are they saying? And then what are they actually doing about it? And again, have a look on LinkedIn, because for sure, if they are doing stuff about it, they're going to be shouting about it. So have a look what they're saying on LinkedIn that they are actually doing rather than just saying.
Brilliant, thanks. And Kiefer, can you add to that?
To be honest, no, I think that kind of sums it up really nicely. And I think the only thing I would add is if you can meet them, meet them. So whether that's an open day, virtual events, in the office ones, whatever it might be, just see if you can talk to the people. Because can't remember now who on the panel said it, but nothing really kind of evidences a firm's culture. Then it's people and how they uphold themselves and talk to each other and the initiatives that they're working on, and are they excited about it as well? So I think, yeah, if you can, and I know it's really difficult sometimes, but hopefully with some of these more webinar style events, it makes it a little bit easier. But see if you can talk to them and ask them those questions.
Brilliant, brilliant. And Noel, so having been at your firm now for 4 years, and would you sort of echo that advice in terms of candidates reaching out to people within each of the individual firms and really trying to understand, well, how do they live those values on the ground?
Yeah, definitely. It was actually the biggest piece of research that I found was the most useful. It was the things that I heard directly from people's mouths. And I think it also says a lot if you reach out to somebody on LinkedIn and they're so keen to talk to you and to tell you why their firm is the best and why their firm is the most amazing. Because the fact that somebody is willing to do that in their personal time rather than their work time shows that they actually truly mean it and believe it. And, they're very passionate about their firm. So I definitely think speaking to people is the best. All firms will claim that they have the best culture, but I think it goes back to the point that you need to meet these people, you need to talk to them over LinkedIn. It doesn't have to be in person or at a real event. These events also count. This is how you find out about lots of different firms, but you can definitely take what they say. And I also find sometimes they give you little snippets of what's going on internally inside the firm that you're not really able to get anywhere else. So these nuggets of information will also make you stand out because not everyone will have spoken to the same person or heard the same kind of tidbit of information.
Sure. Thank you very much.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for that advice, guys. So those were the two sort of reoccurring themes that myself and Paul picked out when we were looking over the questions you've asked. Just looking at the Q&A now. Our first question was on about was all linked to work experience, and we will address work experience a little bit more in our next episode, which will be on the 13th of January, where we're going to look at written applications, and we've got a great panel lined up for that as well. But just to ask the three of you while we have you today, this person was asking about linking their transferable skills to the day-to-day role of an apprentice. How would you go about that? If we start with Kuthra on this one.
Sure. Well, firstly, I would say any and all experience count. So I think sometimes I talk to people and they almost discount certain types of things, and my first reaction is, why? If you have actively volunteered yourself, whether that's a part-time job, an extracurricular activity, sports, the arts. Sometimes I've met apprentice candidates who've set up their own business on Instagram. I don't really care what it is. As long as you volunteered in something, you are developing those transferable skills. And there's a reason why early careers recruiters employers will be assessing those skills, because if you've got the baseline, you'll learn how to do the job on the job. That's the whole point of an apprenticeship program, a training contract, whatever it might route you end up going down to. In its purest form, it is a learning and development program. But that's why we sort of assess those types of skills. So thinking about sort of the skills that you would have been developing, whether it was sort of captaining your football team, volunteering at your local church, working part-time at McDonald's, it doesn't really matter. You would have had to work with people, probably would have had a disagreement. You had to come to some sort of compromise. How did you go about doing it? You're already naturally linking it to the skills that you would need as an apprentice in a law firm, because you'll be dealing with different people every day. You don't know the problems and challenges that you're coming with. So that goes down to the predictability aspect, adapting to a situation. So if you are sort of almost using the star structure, even when you're writing it in your application forms, then you are naturally linking it back to skills that would be relevant to this career. I personally like to spell star with a double R. So for those of you who are still on the call, situation, task, action, result, and reflections. It's all about the learnings. To be honest, so it doesn't even matter if the outcome was a success or not, and failures are your friends sometimes in these conversations. Tell us about, what did you learn? Would you do it again next time in the same way? So if you sort of talk about your work experiences or extracurricular activities in that way and tell us what you learned from them, because for the next sort of, not even beyond the apprenticeship program, for the rest of your life, all you're going to be doing is learning from your experiences. I mean, I've been in early careers recruitment for almost 10 years, and I'm learning every day. And I don't know the answers to all the questions that come to me, but I have to just sort of adapt and problem solve. And that's basically what we're looking for. So people who are naturally curious about wanting to learn, put them, volunteer for different things, and are developing those skills. So if you talk about it in that way, you'll find that you are naturally talking about it in a way that's relevant to that career. So I wouldn't sort of overthink it too much and say, as an apprentice, I would be doing, because it's okay if you don't know what the apprentice's day to day is like until you get there. But thinking about those, why are we looking for communication, collaboration? I don't know. Problem solving skills. When have you demonstrated it? How would this help you in the future? That's how I would talk about it.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Keitha. If I come to Catherine on the next question from Alice. Alice is asking, how do you distinguish a good answer from a generic answer with common interview questions? How would you go about that, Catherine?
I mean, it very much depends on the question, but actually a conversation I was having today with some of our recruitment partners around what they want to see is that they want to see your personality. They want to find out as much as they can about you. And so actually some of the questions that you might get an interview with us and at other firms won't necessarily be ones that you can prepare for. They're going to be about certain dilemmas that they might just put in front of you. So I would kind of be ready for that, to show your personality through that, to show the way that you think about something. There's going to be questions where there's not actually a right answer, but just that you can show your processes, you can reach a particular argument and you can justify it. So I wouldn't worry too much about the perfect answer that you might be able to give, but actually the way in which you approach something is going to be what we're looking for.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Catherine. I'm just conscious of time, so we'll go for one more question from Jonathan. If I come to Nawal on this one, it's a shame that we've missed George because it's around AI, but I found it really interesting where you were talking about from Simmons' perspective, Nawal, on AI. Jonathan's asking, what changes have you noticed in law with regards to AI, and how's the best way to keep up with the evolving legal world? And I guess that really comes back to how you've seen that change within Simmons and Simmons with their internal use of AI.
Look, I think AI is a really controversial topic, and even within Simmons, you'll have various different opinions and people on various ends of the spectrum as to whether AI is a good thing or whether it's not. And I think the most recent debate is AI going to take over junior roles? So if you're kind of a junior solicitor apprentice, paralegal, is it going to kind of take over those jobs? So there's a lot of different things that you're seeing. I mean, Percy was first introduced, I think now going on 2 years, so it's been around for a little while. But the uptake at the beginning, I remember, particularly for the senior people, so partners who have been at the firm for a very long time, wasn't great. People weren't very interested in Percy because they already know how to do everything. They already know how to quickly draft an email. They don't need to ask AI to just quickly check a tone or to just whip up a first draft. Whereas I think as a junior person, sometimes you just need a little bit of validation from anything, and it doesn't have to be your supervisor. You don't want to be bothering your supervisor all of the time with little questions that you can figure out in other ways. I think AI is really useful but you have to understand that AI has limits. It is not the be all end all, and AI can make mistakes. And ultimately, you as the user, as the human, are responsible for the output. So if there ever comes to a point where you're directly copying and paste the output that AI has given you, you are wrong. Whatever it is in you're doing, that is not what you should be doing. You must tailor it, you must check it, and you must understand what it is. So there's a lot of changes, and I think there's a lot of worry as to whether it will take our job. I don't think it will take my job. I don't think it will take junior people's jobs. Do I think our jobs will change? Yes. Do I think they'll become harder? Yes. But I think the best example that I was given was, 20, 30 years ago, there wasn't a precedent. There wasn't a contract precedent. Every time you had to write up and draft up a new contract for something, you would have to do it from scratch. But now you have contract precedents. So you don't have to, stare at a blank piece of paper. You can look at the precedent and what has been done before and use that as a first draft. And I think it's quite similar to AI. You can use AI for really simple things. For example, just checking, spelling and grammar of an email, proofreading a pitch, or for example, something that's been useful is if it's a really urgent deadline, you don't have time to go through the right translation services, it can give you a rough translation. It might not be word for word accurate. So it's thinking of unique ways that you can use AI and implement it in your day-to-day life and make your life easier. It's a tool, it's an extension of you. It is not the solution to kind of everybody's problems, I think is what I would say.
Brilliant. Thanks, Noel. I'm sure everyone will join myself and Paul in thanking our brilliant panel tonight. So we've had Noel from Simmons & Simmons, George, who has left us now, from Lewis Silking, Kutha from White & Case, and Catherine from Farr & Co. Thank you very much for your contributions tonight. They've been absolutely brilliant for a first episode, and we've definitely started with a bang, and hopefully we'll continue such incredible answers in our next episode. So Oliver Henderson, one of our City Century ambassadors this year, has just come in with a question that leads us brilliantly into the close of our first episode. It's almost as if he read my mind, which I promise he didn't. But we have had a question about 3 top tips for development in applications going forward. And that brings us really well on to what myself and Paul were talking about before this episode. So Paul, could I ask you for your 3 top tips and takeaways going forward, please?
Yeah, sure. And I think I've kind of slightly changed my mind as I've listened to the brilliant panelists here today. So yeah, in terms of my 3 top tips from what I've heard today, I think number 1 is take the time to understand the firms that you're applying to. Number 2, I think you need to ensure that you've gone beyond the landing pages of the firm's websites. And some examples of that, maybe you're interested in a particular sector in which a firm operates in. Well, make sure you've gone beyond the description of that sector on the landing page, and you've looked at maybe some thought leadership report that the firm has put out in relation to that sector and the legal issues facing that sector. They may have put out a podcast where you can listen in and find out what sort of issues are keeping their clients awake at night in relation to work within that particular sector. And if it's, for example, the responsible business aspects of the firm, make sure that you've read their responsible business impact report that will be there somewhere on the website. So it's really doing that kind of deep dive into the firm so that you can show at all stages of the application process that you really understand the firm and that you've really made an informed decision as to why that firm's right for you and why also you're right for that particular firm. And then I think my final tip is really to use your network. Don't be afraid to reach out to current solicitor apprentices at the firms that are in your shortlist. Reach them on LinkedIn and ask them about their experiences at the firm, because we've talked a lot about culture of firms, and I think the consensus of opinion on the panel was you really need to talk to the people within those firms to understand what it's like on a day-to-day basis to work within one of those firms. And I think those are my sort of 3 takeaways today, and I think all that's left for me to say is thanks again to the panel, and to wish all of the people who have dialed in today the best of luck with your research, and we look forward to seeing you for the next episode. And when is that next episode, Tim?
So yeah, our next Ask City Century episode, so episode 2, will be on the 13th of January in the new year. and that's going to focus on pre-assessment day process, so optimizing your written applications, which we have touched a little bit on tonight. And I know quite a few of the Q&A questions tonight were linked into that, so that'd be great to dial into if those questions were coming from you. And then also focusing on prepping for online interviews, psychometrics tests, and all things online assessments. We've got a great panel for that, and I can tell you that they're all confirmed. So we've got Fabian Murray from DLA Piper, who is a solicitor apprentice. We've got members from the early careers team at HFW. We've got a solicitor apprentice, Sienna from Stevens and Howard, and then Joanna Stevens, who works on the early careers team at Charles Russell Speechley. So we've got a great panel again. Hopefully they'll give us as incredible answers as we've had tonight from our brilliant panel. So I'll pass on my thanks once more to you for your incredible contributions tonight, and also to everyone else who has joined tonight. And as Paul said, all the best of luck with your applications going forward. Thanks very much. I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you.
Cheers all.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.